Hi, Kieran Stacey from The Guardian. I understand you don't want to comment on what you think is legal or illegal under international law. And I understand your reasons for saying that you don't think an immediate ceasefire is the...
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm sorry. Like, it's absolutely incredible this man, like, continually says, I'm not able to comment on this stuff. It is your fucking job. It's literally your job as a human rights lawyer to understand this stuff, right? So when he's saying, well, actually, no, people took my comments out of context in the LBC interview, like, well, no, we know that you know what you're talking about, right? We know that you're well-versed and well-educated in this stuff because that was literally your job for a very, very long time. You can't just ignore this shit. And on top of that, as we mentioned before, he was perfectly happy, continually happy, to tweet out about how there should be an immediate tribunal about Putin's war crimes and, like, Bucha and Kupiansk. And...
With your lawyer's hat on, is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
Yes.
Yes.
What I've seen already amounts to war crimes, particularly the awful attacks on civilians. And I think it's very important that he's held to account and is responsible. And all those that are acting with him know that they too will be held to account. And this is something which we need to make clear now, so that those who are involved at the moment know what the consequences are. There's a gap that we've got to plug, and that is in relation to the aggression of the invasion. That is not something that at the moment can be dealt with by international tribunals, which is why I and others have suggested that we set up a tribunal to deal with this, a bit like the Nuremberg Tribunal, so that the act of aggression itself, the aggressive invasion that's going on, is itself something for which Putin and everybody who is acting with him can be held to account for.
As well, that's coming up tomorrow, but he was like, yeah, you know, build a new tribunal. You know, it's not, the stuff we have is not enough. And now he's like, look, I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback on what Israel's doing and blah blah blah. Like, you know, they have a right to defend themselves, bro. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I get sick of, like, the Israel's right to defend itself line, because no one disagrees with this. No one disagrees with the sovereign state right to defend itself. What it's used is as a canard get out of jail free clause to be able to ignore the fact that that shouldn't and does not include the war crimes that they are currently engaging in, right? They can respond and say they can defend themselves within international law, but if they never actually mention the fact that they are currently violating international law, the previous phrase completely absolves them from having to mention it. And they never get called out on it either.
Yeah.
The practical way to go. But I think what a lot of your members and MPs are hoping for is a clearer distinction on what you believe to be morally justifiable and not morally justifiable in terms of the actions that Israel is taking right now. So I'd like to give you two specific cases. One, the communications blackout for 36 hours that meant that innocent people in Gaza could not call the emergency services when they were the victims of shelling. And number two, telling people to move south of Wadi Gaza and then sending rockets south of Wadi Gaza to where people have evacuated. Are those two things morally justifiable? Not legal or illegal, but are they...
What's the over or under that he answers this question definitively? What's the over under?
I mean, he's definitely not, but you know, it looked like he's probably texting his wife like, yo, has the Uber come in or whatever? Like, what's he writing down? What's he typing? I don't get it. He just looks so uncomfortable, and he's listening to the question. He's like, "Oh fuck, here's another one." It's like, why have I put myself in this position?
Exactly, because he's literally cornered himself into this by being shit at comms, by not knowing what he's doing. He literally cornered himself into failing on this.
Legal or illegal, but are they moral?
Well, Kieran, I'm not going to break the rule I've just set out for myself in terms of not immediately adjudicating on each and every issue. But look, on the comms blackout, I think everybody was concerned about the comms blackout, and concerns have been raised in relation to that, understandably, for reasons that everybody will understand. And equally, the moving of people, and that's why I...
What's going on with his hand? Like, he's got one hand on the table, which is fair, but he's like got the other hand, like, what's going on? Like, I've never seen someone with hand gestures like that either. Like, it's a bit nitpicky, but like...
He does it at the dispatch box. Like, you see him at the dispatch box, he'll have one hand on the dispatch box and the other hand doing this, and then he'll turn to the speaker with that hand and then turn back again. Mr. Speaker!
It's really weird. I've never seen anyone do that before. Like, he hasn't got, like, any, like, hand, like, it's no gestures in it. Maybe it's a law school thing.
Must be Jedi mind trick. But to answer the question that he's answered there, where he's just said, well, people were concerned about the communication blackout, right? As somebody who's part of the trans community, I've heard the word quote unquote concerns far too often, right? All it is a get out clause again to just not explain your working, right? To not actually explain where you're coming from. Continually just say, well, there are people had concerns. I'm like, no, are they justified concerns? You were asked about the morality of shutting off the communications and of bombing south of the exclusion zone, right? These are explicit questions that you've been asked, and not even on legal terms, but in moral terms, right? Should these are things that should have been done? And if all you respond is, well, people had concerns, then you're not answering the question. But of course, of course, Keir Starmer doesn't like gesture politics, right? We've been told many times he doesn't like gesture politics.
Yeah, I'm concerned by this. Next question, please.
Said in my remarks that where Palestinians feel that they have to flee, it is very important and made absolutely clear without any ambiguity that is with a view to returning because of the history that lies behind this. So
shouldn't you make it explicit then? That they have a right to return? Shouldn't you make that, absolutely explicit that whatever happens if they do move, to safety, they should absolutely be guaranteed the right to return? Because as he said previously, that hasn't happened. I wonder who stopped it from happening.
Exactly. The thing is, and even then, he's not specifically commenting on the reality of the situation either. You can just say, well, this should happen, right? But you can't actually comment on that by saying that unless he's specifically referring to the actions that have been taken already, right? Half of Gaza City, in the north, is already in ruins at this point. I think it's already 5% of the buildings across the entire Gaza Strip are now gone. Where are these people going to go to? How are we going to administer this from happening?
As well. Yeah, not just houses, massive flats and things like that.
Big blocks of flats have all been destroyed. People where actually people would live. And we already have people from Israel, from the actual kind of Israeli politicians, explicitly saying, well, it's not our problem what the Gazans do after the end of this war. But it's not our problem about how they can cope with having all of their houses destroyed. That's for them to deal with, right? What we don't care about any of this. And given the fact that already the forced transfer from the north to the south, that's already a war crime, right? That's already a violation of international law. That's forced transfer. So Keir Starmer, but by saying, right, well, this can happen as long as they're allowed to return, right? He's already admitted that Israel are allowed to commit war crimes because that transfer from the north to the south, regardless of whether they can come back at all or not. Because at this point, right, Israel can say, or they can return or they can return after the war is over, all that they want. If they are left with no buildings, no infrastructure, no nothing, it's just rubble, the entirety of Gaza City north of the exclusion zone, or north of the line describing the exclusion zone, then their ability to return is meaningless because they'll be returning to nothing. And even then, I think that it's unlikely they will be able to return because I fully believe that despite all of these calls about return, they're going to try and annex that because they've already said they want Gaza to be smaller. They want the Arabs to lose land because, quote unquote, that's all Arabs understand, according to Israeli officials.
Yeah, that's why it wouldn't surprise me that they would pull a stunt like that, to be honest. I think it's been widely mentioned that there's a possibility that they're going to annex more land. And they're already doing it more in the West Bank as well. The situation in the West Bank, people aren't really talking about as much because I think the situation in Gaza is a lot worse. But there's a massive increase in settler violence there, taking more land, evicting people from their homes, just taking their houses.
Itmar Ben-Gvir distributing rifles to people. What do they think they're going to use these rifles for? That's not for self-defense.
And this is a thing where I think they need to ask the politicians more about in this country as well. The situation in West Bank right now, because it's that is another dire situation, which is not being talked about enough. Because I wonder if Starmer would say what he would say about the situation in West Bank right now. Because there's no justification for that because Hamas isn't there, and people saying, "Oh, Hamas have got people there, or whatever." Is Hamas have got doesn't their leader live in Qatar?
Yeah, their leader lives in Qatar, and the head of Hamas in Palestine lives in the Gaza Strip, lives in Khan Yunis.
So that means Israel going to attack Qatar as well. Do you know what I mean? This whole thing is just complete nonsense.
Exactly. None of it makes any sense at all. And again, it is abdication of their political responsibilities when, not in every single situation, talking about international law, not mentioning the specific situations that people are talking about. Because what's happening in the West Bank, I mean, to be fair, it's always been in contravention of international law. All of the settlement expansion, all of what they're doing, like the apartheid state they are currently running, like defined as such by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, Desmond Tutu, right? I think he knows a lot about fucking apartheid. I'm not sure about anybody else who might be an expert on these kind of things, right? But human rights organizations and people from apartheid South Africa have said this stuff. Like, I think that's a pretty good situation, and that's not being called out for what it is. And on top of that, the expansion of settler violence, the expansion of people being moved from their homes, the people being expelled or being forced to flee from their homes in the West Bank, that's been continued to happen. And failure to call this out, right? Failure to explicitly talk about this and condemn it, right? In the way that everyone seemed to want to condemn the actions of October the 7th, which were in contravention of international law, right? It's an abdication of responsibility, and it is one-siding an issue that clearly has two sides to it. And that is, again, complete failure, and it just shows how completely cucked he is to, like, the Western foreign policy establishment on this issue. Simple as that.
As I've just set out in the 15 minutes or so that I spoke for, it's clear where I'm coming from on this. As it is on humanitarian aid, you know, we have been saying now for a long time in the 3 weeks or so that we've had, that aid needs to get in. And that
have you been saying that for 3 weeks, Lil Bro, or did you say
medicines,
I had a right to siege?
Yeah, exactly.
Has he been saying it for 3 weeks, or has Lil Bro been saying they do have that right to cut off food?
Exactly, 100%. Like, if he actually believed this, at some point he would have said that before. Amusingly, before Crispin Blunt had written a letter using the ICJP to potentially refer him to the ICC for abetting war crimes. It's weird how the day after Crispin Blunt said this, he suddenly had changed his position. Isn't that weird? Don't you find that strange?
Yeah, you know, maybe he was like, oh yeah, Crispin's right about international law here. It's a bit I forgot. You know, it's the last bit of the Geneva Convention. It's like, oh, I forgot. I didn't read that bit. I didn't read it cover to cover. Like, do you remember when they asked what's his face? No, Rob. When they were like, oh, have you read the Good Friday Agreement recently? He goes, yeah. And they asked about specific bits. Like, well, I haven't read it cover to cover. That's what Stan was going to say about the Geneva Convention. He's like, look, I haven't read all of it. You know, it's a whole convention. But you know, I know about Geneva and convention, so you know, it's the same thing, right?
Exactly. This is exactly the kind of position that we're looking at here. But it seems to me like, again, he was just changing his position because it wasn't something he cared or believed in. He was just trying to triangulate to what he thought would be the most electorally viable and or would stop him from getting referred to the International Criminal Court.
And fuel is not acceptable and has to be addressed. So I don't think reading and hearing what I've just said in the last 15 minutes can leave many people in much doubt about what I think should happen. But what I'm not going to do is adjudicate on each and every example.
I'm sorry, he keeps saying dumb shit, and I keep wanting to say stuff like, you should not leave anyone in any doubt. And I'm like, bro, I have more doubts now than I did about, you know, before the stream even started.
Exactly.
You keep talking about collective responsibility and unity. I'm seeing zero.
Exactly, 100. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just crazy that he continues to just say things that make it obviously unclear to everybody, right? There is no certainty in basically any of his positions, right? Of course, this is just a wider problem of Keir Starmer not having any consistent principles or consistent morals or consistent ethical positions, because everything will just get changed according to what he thinks is the most electorally viable, what he thinks will carry the most favour with the public, how he can triangulate a position of relevance to this thing, and he'll just lie. He'll just lie and say we have unity as a party when they clearly just don't.
It's clear gaslighting when it's like, I've been saying for the last 3 weeks that they need to allow food. He's like, no, you didn't. You spent 9 days. You took 9 days to clarify a statement. 9.
9 days, yeah. So gaslighter, clearly.
Oh no, not morning. Come on. The kid starver, so gaslighter, and so war crimer. Jesus, this man.
They get increasingly less tenable.
His Wikipedia page is going to be insane. Someone's going to update it.
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.